Hello and welcome to the pitch for my new futuristic science fiction film Panoptica. This film will run around for 130 to 140 minutes and is based upon surveillance theories I've read during this course. I aim for Panoptica to engage the audience to question whether or not surveillance should be allowed to advance. Is it only to worry about if people have things to hide? Is it a threat to our freedom? Or will surveillance continue to intrude on our lives more than ever in the future? Discussing the theories that inspired Panoptica. So using theory upon surveillance, specifically writings from Foucault and writings of the inventions of the Panopticon, it inspired my camera shots on the film name. The tower invented placed central to the circular prisons where the prison warden and his family were trapped into watching prisoners. I then wanted to emulate this by trapping my own audience into watching the film, mimicking Foucault's writings. Therefore, the shots will always have a border around them emulating a surveillance camera screen, and the audience are thrust into taking on a warden's role until our main protagonist hacks and disables cameras on her, and the camera shots return to conventional cinematography. In one scene in particular, Violet, the protagonist, will stare into the camera lens, breaking the fourth wall and confronting the audience with the knowledge that she is aware she is being watched, and now is being watched back. With the plot, I was particularly inspired by Jenkins' 2012, who stated that surveillance is increasingly one-sided and impersonal, and that the impersonal and generic nature of surveillance poses problems. Using ideas from this and how the camera can only capture image without the context of human emotions of a situation brings up questions of how this can be manipulated. A real-life example of this is how reality TV producers can manipulate video caught on reality TV shows to create a false narrative which looks real. This is called verisimilitude. I will use ideas by Jenkins of the impersonal nature of surveillance in my plot. In the beginning of the film, we will see our protagonist as a criminal, as we see them engage in the murder of a man, a criminal act as seen from surveillance camera angles. But the angle does not see that our female protagonist was actually fighting off a rape, which the surveillance cameras do not understand or pick up upon. That should highlight the message of awareness that context cannot be captured on camera. Emotion and thought also cannot be, meaning the vigilante experience of watching is not always one that is accurate and free from bias. Identity performance is another concept, and this was derived by research done by Duffy and Chen in 2019. This concept is said to be part of the hidden curriculum, which was stated on page 120. Alongside also using camera angles to manipulate perception, my main character will be aware of her constant surveillance and understand that the AI watching the algorithms can be tricked, and she uses that to her advantage, knowing certain sequences will trick the system into thinking she is good, and therefore she can escape from her city undetected. Another writing which also discusses this is Bruno 2012, who also discussed the idea of visibility, expanding even further about how being seen can actually be a form of counter-surveillance. This counter-surveillance is achieved through the active construction of one's own image. This was said on page 345. This again inspired the plot for my film, that for half the movie until the climax ending when Violet escapes from the complex, the audience watches Violet through the camera's perception of her, and it's only when we see from POV shots and hear Violet's internal monologue that we realise why she is doing what she is doing. Violet understands this counter-surveillance invisibility and constructs a whole different identity which the surveillance cameras will not pick up upon, which acts like a blackout curtain over her true intentions, which is a form of anti-surveillance. So after now discussing the theories of surveillance that have inspired me, I will now discuss in more depth the plot for Panoptica. This is a science fiction, futuristic-based film. It is meant to represent our world and hold some familiarity. I was inspired by Black Mirror episodes, where even though these were futuristic technologies and situations, there was always an aura of familiarity and recognition in everything we watched. It truly felt as though these events could occur at any time. It is very conceivable, the plots, and I wanted to emulate that in this film, so language used and humour will remain the same so we can relate. Panoptica is based in the year 2100, a seemingly utopian world where crime never occurs, global warming has ended, world hunger no longer exists, and there is equality among all ethnicities. It is a seemingly ideal world, a future that many of us strive for, but is it all what it's cracked up to be? The film questions the cost of equality and how it seems forever difficult to ensure equality prevails without higher powers benefiting more than others, relying on exploitation, or doing some questionable things in order to create this utopia. Panoptica society could only be built up to this place of utopia because it relies on regular cullings. This utopian world was only created because of the 2020 pandemic, which led to the deaths of 3 billion people, meaning all countries had lost governments, and whoever was left made a new world order. All countries now have the same name and follow the same order. They are secular societies and have the same similar structure occurring in them. Culling is a regular occurrence and a normal part of this society. Its justification is that killings of the most vulnerable in society need to occur so society can function and live in balance with biocycles. And citizens are told this is only done so we do not cause global warming again. I was inspired by a concept called ecofascism, which has begun to rise. I found this very interesting because it is so complex and debatable. The people who are culled are vulnerable members of society, for example, those who have severe mental illness, learning difficulties, disabilities, or serious illness. This is very controversial. I want my audience to debate whether this is ethical or not. Is it right to sacrifice human lives who are vulnerable as a way to justify living in balance with the earth? Our main protagonist is called Violet. She is a young black female. She is central to the plot. She sees through this utopia and deeply disagrees with it. Her own father was killed off because he had an accident at work and was placed in a wheelchair, where he was suddenly deemed vulnerable and was culled off. Violet, full of grief and resentment, decides to break the system and bring it down. The mood and lighting will be bright, clean and modern, luscious greenery. This will be a nice contrast against the cullings, which are essentially live executions that happen daily. I was inspired by horror films such as Midsummer, directed by Ari Aster, where horror takes place in summer with daylight and flowers in their surroundings and a peaceful environment, a huge contrast to the actions that are taking place. Surveillance in the film will be central. As mentioned previously, as an audience we will watch our central protagonist through the surveillance camera lens. Alongside being aware citizens are constantly being watched in the society and surveilled at all time to ensure society runs smoothly with no crime. Another form of surveillance I will introduce in the film is a form of genetic and health surveillance. In the storyline are devices implanted at birth which monitor health. If anything mentally or physically begins to occur, that person is likely to be culled off. Monitoring one's health actually is a form of surveillance in my opinion, and I imagine the dark consequence of this alongside the positives. Also within my film, all pregnant women will have their fetuses analysed for their genetic coding and surveyed by a system to see if and when they will develop serious health issues in their lives. If it shows up that the fetus will have something, the system will decide whether to terminate the pregnancy or not. The mother has no choice over the matter. I was inspired by genetic screenings that are being conducted today to choose babies which will not carry hereditary diseases, and the moral and ethical challenges that this brings up. I created a future where genetic screening has led to a type of eugenics being justified in the name of saving the environment, and wondered how audiences would react to such. Conclusion. My film idea called Panoptica was inspired by many materials read in this course. I was inspired by the morality and ethical questions surveillance brings up and the confusing nature of such. Surveillance is often a grey area. It is neither 100% accurate or correct or 100% unjust and evil. It has its flaws and its strengths. I aim to confront the audience with questions over what is morally just and what is not, and ask what would we like a world to be and what we want a world to look like, as this is somewhere or at least something similar to where we are heading with society in the future. I thoroughly enjoyed this assignment.